the only thing that is keeping the government shut down. The only thing preventing people from going back to work and basic research starting back up and farmers and small business owners getting their loans. The only thing that's preventing all that from happening right now, today, in the next 5 minutes, is that Speaker John Boehner won't even let the bill get a yes or no vote because he doesn't want to anger the extremists in his party. That's all. That's what this whole thing is about.
That the president not only going on the offense when it comes to the shutdown today, but also calling out John Boehner by name. Not a move that's likely to cool tempers when it cuts to the showdown over the shutdown. Now, as the nation navigates through day 3 of this pointless silliness here, the furlough of 800,000 workers here is still at stake. Real people getting impacted here, not just posturing from both sides. Now, the question everybody asking, of course, is, are we any closer to a deal that ends this thing already? Unfortunately, the answer is no. But there may be, as I said, just a little glimmer of news to tell you about that. There may be a light at the end of the tunnel if you read between the lines.
You really got to look for it, Rich. And that news is on the debt limit, which, as you know, the U.S. will reach on October 17th, meaning we're just 14 days away from a first-ever default on the full faith and credit of the United States. And today, House Speaker John Boehner reportedly told Republicans in his caucus he will not allow the nation to default. Boehner saying that if push comes to shove on the debt limit, he is willing to pass a measure raising it through a combination of Republican and Democratic votes, essentially the bipartisan move he's been unwilling to do on the federal budget. As for the budget and the shutdown, the big news was just outside the Beltway in Rockville, Maryland, as the president went into campaign mode trying to sway voters and votes on Capitol Hill.
So my simple message today is call a vote. Call a vote. Put it on the floor and let every individual member of Congress make up their own minds. And they can show the American people, are you for a shutdown or not?
Still no signs that will happen, that vote, but there are growing indications that vote would pass and that the GOP unity on the budget may be starting to crack. At least 4 Republicans from our region have either said or indicated they would vote to end the shutdown with what's called a clean resolution, one without any other policy changes like Obamacare. Well, Long Island's Peter King has been among the most outspoken in the GOP on this. And speaking of cracks within the GOP, more signs the knives may be out for the man seen in the middle of the shutdown push, Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Politico reporting on a hostile meeting Cruz had with fellow Republicans in the Senate yesterday. They were looking for an exit strategy from the shutdown. Politico reporting a defensive Cruz had no clear plan to force an end to the shutdown or explain how he would defund Obamacare as he's demanded all along. And things got particularly heated when the Republicans asked Cruz point blank if he would renounce attacks waged on them by a particularly feared Tea Party lobby he's associated with. Cruz's response, quote, "I will not." And this from an unnamed senator in the room. Quote, "It was very evident to everyone in the room that Cruz doesn't have a strategy. He never had a strategy and could never answer a question about what the end game was." Quote, "I just wish," that Republican continued, "the 35 House members that have bought the snake oil that was sold could witness what was witnessed at lunch today." Support also eroding for the GOP outside of the Capitol. You know about the awful poll numbers for the GOP on this. This week, the editorial boards of the nation's 10 most read newspapers, all either criticizing or blaming the GOP for the shutdown or both. But there's more, like Wall Street now angry with the Tea Party. The money quote from this Politico article, the new Tea Party movement is not particularly pro-business, they wrote. They certainly are not pro-Wall Street and pro-big banks. That is a new strain in the Republican Party that worries many on Wall Street. And if that wasn't enough pressure on the GOP from their friends, check out this headline from the Daily Beast. GOP donors revolt against Republican-led government shutdown. Their thoughts best summed up by a former Bush supporter, Houston's Fred Zeidman, quote, "I'm not writing a check to anyone that is not working for the American people." Finally, maybe this exchange best sums up the last 24 hours for the GOP. A quote to the conservative Washington Examiner by sophomore Indiana Tea Party Republican Marlin Stutzman. He said, quote, "We're not going to be disrespected. We have to get something out of this," he said, "and I don't even know what that is." A quote that was sitting on a tee for President Obama today.
You have already gotten the opportunity to serve the American people. There's no higher honor than that. The American people aren't in the mood to give you a goodie bag to go with it. What you get is our intelligence professionals being back on the job. What you get is our medical researchers back on the job. What you get are little kids back into Head Start. What you get are our national parks and monuments open again. What you get is the economy not stalling, but continuing to grow. What you get are workers continuing to be hired. That's what you get. That's what you should be asking for. Take a vote, stop this farce, and end this shutdown right now.
Rich.
All right, Andrew. Now let's bring in our next guest, Congressman Tim Bishop, Democrat from New York, from the great part of Long Island here. Congressman, I hear all the words. I see the polls here. I see the infighting in the party. But do you get any sense at the end of the day there'll be capitulation either by the Speaker or the Tea Party members? Are we any closer to seeing an endgame to this?
You know, I think that the members of the Republican Party, a great many of them are dissatisfied with the strategy that their leadership has pursued, are recognizing that this is causing severe hardship for the people that they represent, people that we all in Congress represent. And I think a great many members are looking for a way out, but now what that way out is very hard to identify. I mean, there is a very clear way out, very easy way out. Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor simply need to put on the floor the bill that passed the Senate, what we call a clean continuing resolution. No policy riders, would fund the government at the level of $986 billion for the at that annual rate for the next 6 weeks. It will pass the House in a heartbeat if Speaker Boehner and Leader Cantor would put it on the floor, but thus far they have refused to do so.
And if you, and I know you've seen it, Congressman Cantor, he said, don't give in now. We've got the president on the ropes. I know there's no rationale that supports that, but you get a sense of there. It seems the president's got three options. You correct me, maybe there's more. But one is, don't give an inch here. There's no incentive to capitulate in any small way here because they'll read it as weakness, and this will just fold into future fights. The second one is, you know what? Agree to a grand bargain. Agree to an idea that we'll get through this and the debt limit, but we'll set the table where it talks about taxes and spending and about entitlement reform, Medicare, Social Security. Set a date for it. Don't have it impact too. Or, and I saw this in a recent interview with President Clinton, he said, I let Gingrich save a little face. I threw him something that had no big consequential thing, but I gave them something to save face, like maybe you know, doing something on the medical devices that you'll take out of Obamacare in terms of the taxes on it, et cetera. Of those options I laid out, do any of them sound realistic at this point for the president other than telling him to go scratch?
Well, let me say this. First off, if Leader Cantor thinks that they have President Obama on the ropes, that is wishful thinking in the extreme and shows a lack of contact with reality that, frankly, is stunning. But I would say this. I think that what the president has done thus far has been right. The president, we have an obligation to fund the government. That's one of the fundamental obligations of the Congress, and we have a fundamental obligation to pay our bills. Bills, by the way, that we have already incurred and that the Congress authorized. So those are two imperatives that we simply must live up to. Open the government, pay our bills. What I believe we should do is pass the clean continuing resolution, pass an increase in the debt limit, and then sit down. Then sit down as reasonable people and try to craft a way forward that recognizes the financial difficulties that the country is experiencing and lays out a fair, reasonable, balanced path forward that allows us to have the kind of financial stability that we all would want. We should all recognize that our deficit has dropped by about half from the deficit that President Obama inherited. He inherited a deficit from President Bush that was $1.3 trillion. The deficit is now somewhere in the neighborhood of $650 to $680 billion. Still too high, but we've made remarkable progress in the last 5 years. We need to discuss on a bipartisan basis a path forward, but we cannot do it with the threat of a government shutdown and the threat of a default that would be cataclysmic hanging over our heads.